needs before his own, who would drive through any storm to reach someone who needed him. Even in death, especially in death, that hadn't changed. He got into the impossible car and started the impossible engine. In the rearview mirror, he could see the old man standing at the edge of the overlook, a patient figure silhouetted against the clearing sky. Then the fog began to roll in again, thick and concealing. And Mark understood that somewhere on this mountain road, another desperate traveler was about to begin their final journey. Mark pulled onto the highway and began to drive. The speedometer read 0, but he felt as if he were finally moving at exactly the right speed. Behind him, the accident scene faded into the distance, becoming just another tragedy on a road that had seen too many. The fog began to thicken again as Mark climbed back toward the pass, but this time he wasn't fighting it. He was part of it now, part of the eternal cycle of journeys that began in desperation and ended in understanding. The road stretched ahead of him, winding through mountains that existed simultaneously in the physical world and somewhere else entirely. Time passed. Minutes or hours or years, Mark couldn't tell. In this place between life and death, temporal measurements held no meaning. What mattered was purpose, and Mark's purpose crystallized with perfect clarity. Then he saw headlights approaching through the fog. A car was climbing toward the pass, moving too fast for the conditions. Mark could see it weaving slightly, the driver fighting to maintain control on the slick asphalt. As it drew closer, he recognized the signs. The desperate speed, the reckless determination, the aura of someone racing against time to reach a loved one. Mark pulled over and waited. The approaching car, a red Honda Civic, flew past without slowing. Mark caught a glimpse of the driver, a young woman, maybe 25. Her face streaked with tears, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her lips were moving, and Mark knew she was praying or pleading or making the kind of desperate bargains with fate that people made when everything they loved hung in the balance. Mark pulled back onto the highway and followed at a distance. He didn't have to wait long. The Honda hit a patch of black ice on a sharp curve. Mark watched it happen with the terrible clarity of inevitability. The sudden loss of traction, the desperate overcorrection, the moment when physics took control and human will became irrelevant. The car spun sideways, clipped the guardrail, and tumbled down the steep embankment into the trees. Mark stopped his car and walked to the edge of the road. Below, the Honda lay on its roof, steam rising from the crumpled hood. The headlights still burned, casting crazy shadows through the pine trees. There was no movement from inside. Within minutes, the scene would fill with emergency vehicles just as Mark's had. But the young woman's journey through the physical world had ended the moment her car left the pavement. Mark waited. She appeared about 20 feet from the wreckage, standing among the trees in jeans and a college sweatshirt, staring at the smoking ruin of her car with the same incomprehension Mark remembered feeling. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she had the lean build of a runner. Pretty, but in an understated way that suggested she'd never been entirely comfortable with attention. No, she said to no one in particular. No. This isn't happening. Mark approached carefully, remembering his own violent rejection of the impossible. Are you hurt? He asked. She spun toward him, eyes wide with confusion and terror. Where did you come from? Did you see what happened? We need to call 911. I need to get to the hospital. My mom... Her voice broke. What's your name? Mark asked gently. Jessica. Jessica Liu. She looked back at the wreckage, then at Mark. Who are you? How did you get down here so fast? Mark chose his words carefully. I'm someone who understands what you're going through. Someone who's made a similar journey. Jessica shook her head violently. I'm not going through anything. I'm fine. My car crashed, but I'm fine. I need to get out of here. I need to get to Sacramento. My mom is... She stopped, her face crumpling. She's dying. Cancer. The doctor said she might not make it through the night. Mark felt the familiar ache of recognition. Another desperate child racing through dangerous conditions to reach a dying parent. Another love so fierce it made rational people do irrational things. Tell me about her, Mark said. Jessica looked at him as if he were insane. What? We don't have time for... Tell me about your mother. Something in Mark's voice, the gentleness, the infinite patience, seemed to calm her slightly. She's the strongest person I know. Is. Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She raised me by herself after my dad left. Worked 2 jobs to put me through college. Never complained, never asked for help from anyone. What does she do? Nurse. ICU at UC Davis Medical Center. She's been fighting this cancer for 2 years, but it spread. The doctors said there wasn't anything else they could do. Jessica's voice grew stronger as she talked about her mother, as if speaking about her could somehow keep her alive. But she's tough. She's not giving up. She's waiting for me. Mark understood. Just as he had convinced himself that Danny needed him, Jessica had convinced herself that her mother's survival depended on her arrival. Love created its own desperate logic. How far were you from Sacramento when the accident happened? Mark asked. Jessica looked around, trying to orient herself. I don't know. Maybe an hour? I was making good time despite the fog. I just needed to... She stopped, staring at Mark with growing suspicion. Why aren't you calling for help? Why aren't we trying to get me out of here? Mark gestured toward the wreckage. Look again, Jessica. Really look. She turned toward the Honda, and Mark watched her face as reality began to penetrate. The car was completely destroyed, crushed and twisted beyond any possibility of survival. Steam continued to rise from the engine, but there was no movement inside, no sign that anyone could have walked away from such devastation. That's impossible, Jessica whispered. I was wearing my seatbelt. The airbag deployed. I remember... What do you remember? Jessica's voice became uncertain, dreamlike. I remember the steering wheel going loose, the car spinning. There was this moment when I knew I was going to hit something. And I thought about my mom, about how I wasn't going to make it in time. She paused, her breathing growing shallow. Then everything went white. Mark waited, letting her process the information at her own pace. He remembered his own violent rejection of the truth, the way his mind had fought against accepting the impossible. But I'm standing here, Jessica said, desperation creeping into her voice. I'm talking to you. I'm alive. Yes, Mark agreed. You are. Just not in the way you were before. Jessica stared at him, then at her hands, then at the wreckage again. Mark could see the exact moment when understanding hit her. The way her face went pale, the way her legs seemed to buckle slightly. I'm dead, she said flatly. Your body is, Mark confirmed gently. But you're still here, still conscious, still yourself. But my mom, your mother will understand, Mark said. She's a nurse. She knows how dangerous these mountain roads can be, especially in conditions like this. She'll know you died trying to reach her. Jessica shook her head violently. She'll blame herself. She'll think if she hadn't gotten sick, she hadn't asked me to come. Did she ask you to come? No. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. She told me to stay in school, to not worry about her. But I couldn't just sit there while she was dying. I had to try to get to her. Mark nodded. Love makes us do things that don't make sense to anyone else. It makes us take risks we shouldn't take. Drive roads we shouldn't drive. Push beyond the limits of safety and reason. Like you did. Mark looked up surprised. Jessica was studying his face with the